I still remember the way she looked at me, not with curiosity, not even with indifference, with judgment. It was a rainy Tuesday morning when I walked into the lobby of Harlow and Pierce, consulting, wearing a plain navy suit I'd owned for 5 years. No designer label, no flashy watch, no luxury car waiting outside. Just me and a leather folder tucked under my arm. The receptionist barely glanced up. Her eyes traveled from my worn briefcase to my simple shoes. "Interview?" she asked flatly. "Yes," I replied with a polite smile. She handed me a visitor badge without another word. The waiting area was filled with sharp suits and confident laughter. 2 men were comparing investment portfolios. A woman in a tailored blazer scrolled through her tablet, gold bracelet glinting under the lights. I took a seat quietly. I'd built companies from nothing, negotiated million-dollar acquisitions, sat across from international investors who tried to intimidate me. But that morning, I was just another candidate, or so they thought. The glass door opened. "Daniel Reeves," a tall woman called out. I stood. Her eyes flickered with surprise, just for a second, before she masked it with a professional smile. "This way." Inside the conference room, 3 people sat at the table. The tall woman, Miranda Blake, head of recruitment. A sharply dressed man with slick back hair, Thomas Reed, senior partner. And another woman typing on a laptop. HR, I assumed. Miranda gestured to the chair. "Have a seat." I thanked her and sat down. Thomas leaned back, studying me openly. "So," he said, glancing at my resume, "you've worked in operations management for a mid-sized logistics firm." "Yes. And before that, various leadership roles." He raised an eyebrow. "Nothing particularly impressive listed here." Miranda added, "No Ivy League MBA, no major corporate names." Her tone was neutral, but her expression wasn't. I folded my hands calmly. "My experience is more practical than academic." Thomas smirked. "Yes, we can see that." There it was, the first subtle cut. Miranda leaned forward. "This position requires executive presence, high-level client interaction. Our consultants advise CEOs of multi-million-dollar firms." "I understand," I said. Thomas glanced at my watch, an old silver piece my father gave me years ago. "Do you?" he asked. "Because presentation matters in our world." I met his gaze evenly. "I agree." He gestured vaguely toward me. "With respect, you don't exactly look the part." The room went quiet. I could feel the HR representative stop typing. "Look the part." I repeated calmly. Miranda gave a tight smile. "Our clients expect a certain standard. Polished, refined, prestigious." Thomas added, "Image reflects capability." I'd heard that before, years ago, when I pitched my first startup idea wearing borrowed shoes, when investors laughed me out of the room, when a competitor said I was too small town to compete nationally. I built my company anyway, and eventually I acquired his. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I asked gently, "May I ask what specifically about me suggests I lack capability?" Thomas shrugged. "It's not personal. You just seem simple." The word hung in the air. Simple. Miranda nodded slightly. "We're looking for someone dynamic, commanding." I smiled faintly. "I see." Thomas closed the resume folder. "To be candid, Mr. Reeves, I'm not sure you'd fit into our culture." Miranda chimed in, "You may want to aim for firms that align better with your presentation." There it was. Not my skills. Not my ideas. My appearance. I leaned back slightly. "Before we conclude," I said calmly, "I have one question." Thomas looked impatient. "Go ahead. What would you say defines strong leadership?" Miranda answered quickly. "Confidence, authority, vision." Thomas added, "Results?" I nodded. "And humility?" I asked. They exchanged glances. "Humility is admirable," Miranda said carefully, "but this is business." I stood slowly. "Thank you for your time." Thomas looked mildly relieved. "Of course. HR will see you out." I walked toward the door, then paused. "Oh, one more thing." They looked up. "You may want to prepare for tomorrow's board meeting." Thomas frowned. "Excuse me?" "The acquisition vote I clarified. Miranda blinked. What acquisition? I met their eyes. The one involving Harlow and Pierce Consulting. Silence. Thomas let out a short laugh. And what would you know about that? I reached into my leather folder and removed a single document. I placed it on the table. Miranda picked it up, her face drained of color. Thomas leaned forward, confusion turning into shock, because at the top of the page was the letterhead of Axton Global Holdings, my company, and beneath it, a finalized acquisition agreement, effective immediately. Miranda's voice trembled slightly. Axton Global is acquiring us? Yes, I replied calmly. Thomas looked at me. You're saying you work for Axton? I shook my head. I don't work for Axton. A long pause. I founded it. The room went completely still. The HR representative slowly lowered her laptop. Thomas stared at me as if trying to reconstruct the last 30 minutes in his mind. You're Daniel Reeves. Miranda whispered. The Daniel Reeves? The CO. I confirmed gently. Thomas stood abruptly. This is some kind of joke. It's not, I said. The paperwork was finalized this morning. I scheduled interviews anonymously across several departments. Miranda's hand tightened around the document. You were testing us? I was evaluating leadership culture. Thomas's earlier confidence had vanished. You set us up. No, I corrected calmly. You revealed yourselves. Silence pressed against the walls. I came dressed exactly as I do when I visit our warehouses. I continued, when I meet entry-level staff, when I speak with small business owners. I looked at Thomas. You said image reflects capability. He didn't answer. I turned to Miranda. You said executive presence matters. She swallowed. I agree, I said, but presence is not measured by price tags. The HR representative spoke softly. Why do this? Because culture starts at the top, I replied, and I needed to see how this firm treats those it perceives as less. Thomas ran a hand over his face. You're firing us, he muttered. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I walked back to the table and picked up a document. Axton Global invests in people, in integrity, in leadership that builds others up, not tears them down based on appearance. I looked at both of them. Tomorrow's board meeting will address restructuring. Miranda's voice was barely audible. We misjudged you. I offered a small, composed smile. Yes, I said. You did. I walked toward the door again. This time, no one stopped me. As I stepped into the hallway, the same receptionist who had barely looked at me earlier suddenly stood straighter. Have a good day, she said nervously. I smiled warmly. You too. Outside, the rain had stopped. My driver opened a car door, but I paused for a moment. Looking back at the glass building, people often assume power looks loud, expensive, impressive, but the strongest leaders I've known were simplicity like armor, because when you know who you are, you don't need the world to validate it. They bullied me for looking too simple. Tomorrow, I would walk into that same building, not as a candidate, but as the CEO, and this time, they would finally understand what real leadership looks like.